Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Suraj in Cloud. And in previous videos we have seen what is EKS and the architecture of the control plane as well as the data plane. Now in this video we are going to actually spin up the EKS cluster and see what are the things which we need and how we can go with it, right? So yeah, let's get started. Yeah, so this is our today's topic. So in this video we are going to see what IAM roles are required for us, right? Then what are the VPC requirements, very basic, we are not going into the depth. Then we'll actually spin up the cluster and then we'll try to access it via the CLI tools, and then we will add nodes to our cluster, right? So IAM role, VPC, spin up the cluster, access it, and then add nodes to it, right? Now what we need, obviously you will need AWS account, but along with that you will need kubectl on your machine and AWS CLI on the machine. Along with this we'll need two different roles, one for the cluster as in for the control plane and one for the worker node, which I already created, which I will show you as well. In the VPC, usually I use Terraform VPC module to create a simple VPC. It sets up few different things, such as it sets up some, oh no, I cancelled it, okay. It spin up the private subnet for me, public subnets for me, NAT gateways, some elastic IP, internet gateway, and some security groups, right? So yeah, so now we'll go into our console and see how it looks like, right? So now we are in my AWS account. As I said, I'll show you what were the things in the VPC. So I'm in the London region because that's the closest I'm in. So the VPC we are going to use is Suraj in Cloud -1 VPC, which is this. As I said, the model already created subnets for me, 3 in the private, 3 in the public. The routes are already populated, the internet gateways and the NAT gateways, everything is already set up. IAM role. Now this IAM role information I have taken from the AWS documentation. Now if you look at the EKS cluster role and the node role, for the cluster role, which is used by control plane, all you need is to attach Amazon EKS cluster policy. That's it. And trust policy is the service. You will trust the service eks.amazon.aws.com. And for the worker node, it's a very simple service, but 3 important policy which we will attach is EKS worker node policy, EC2 container registrar read policy to fetch some images from container registry, and the CNI policy which will be used by AWS VPC CNI, which comes by default with EKS cluster, right? Nice. So we saw what VPC things, we saw IAM roles and what policy we need. We don't really need to define anything because AWS has populated everything for us. Now let's go to the EKS console. Now I don't have any cluster, so you won't see anything in here, but let's quickly create our first cluster. I will call it as Suraj in Cloud -1. So by default it selected 1.221 version, but the current latest supported version is 1.22. So let's go to 1.22. As you can see, the cluster role I already defined, so it automatically selected. If there are different role, you can select a role from this drop down. Secrets encryption, you can define a KMS key which will be used to encrypt your Kubernetes secret. It's like an additional layer of encryption on top of your secrets, because Kubernetes secrets are not really secure because they are base64 encoded. So we definitely need more additional layer of security while storing them. In this particular tutorial, I'm not going to use this feature because I want to keep it very light and simple. In upcoming videos, we'll focus on these small things in more depth. You can add a few tags to the cluster. It is our test environment. Then next step is about the networking. So I already have VPC, which I showed you. As soon as I select it, select all my subnets. Among them, half of them are public subnets, half of them are private subnets. Now you can select a security group here, which will be applying to the network interfaces created by EKS in your subnet. So but I'm keeping this as a blank so that EKS will create a default security group. In ideal production setup, you may need to create the security group on your own, because in case you need like a more fine-grained network access, by default, I'll show you by default the security group created by EKS. It just allow everything inbound and outbound. Here you can select the cluster IP address family, basically whether you want IPv4 address or IPv6 addresses for your pods and services in your cluster. So I'm keeping it IPv4. Here you can configure the service IP range as well. I'm leaving it as a blank because whatever EKS defines, I'll just go with it. Now next section is cluster endpoint access. Now this is pretty interesting, which I will discuss in more in another episode. But what's happening here is these options are for whether you want your cluster endpoint to be public or private, or public and private both. What that means is you don't need any sort of VPN, or you don't need to be in VPC to access the cluster endpoint. So I'm just keeping it as public. Now the next section is add-ons. So in add-ons, you can see there is VPC, CNI, Core DNS and kubeproxy. Basically these are the components which runs on your Kubernetes cluster. VPC CNI is basically there will be some daemon set pod running in your cluster. Core DNS is used for service discovery in Kubernetes, and kubeproxy is for the service networking. Now you can manage these components via the networking EKS features called add-ons. Now I'm going to leave them as is. Now this says this one information. This add-on will use IAM role of the node where it runs, right? So if you remember in worker node IAM, we already added the CNI policy, which will be used by this, right? So if we now do next, the last piece of configuration is the logging. There are five kind of logging which I can enable here. API server logging, audit logging, authenticator means to log the authentication request, the controller manager and the scheduler. I can enable them one by one, or I can enable them all as well. Once I enable them, I can access those logs in CloudWatch. I'll keep a separate episode for the logging because I want to keep this session very basic. so I will not enable them and go to the next. Now here on this page we can review our settings. So this was my name of the cluster, version, the role, tags, VPC settings, endpoint, add-ons, how disable logging, and let's create the cluster. There are few warnings, that's fine. It says manage node group and forget profile can be added once it is created. So currently we are just providing the control plane and there won't be any node, right? So this takes around 10 minutes to spin up the cluster, you can see. So let's come back after 10 minutes.
A few moments later.
So our cluster is now active. We can explore various things in here. This overview page shows nodes, but we don't have any nodes. Under the resources section you can see various resources. I can see there are core DNS pod been created, but I'm pretty sure they are in pending state because there are no nodes. You can explore other things as well. So you can see there is no node, config map and secrets. This is pretty cool. They have recently added this feature where you can access, or not really access, but at least you can see the basic things about the resources in your cluster. On the configuration section you'll see the cluster related information, the endpoint and ARN and all other stuff, networking, add-ons. Is there any authentication, logging and all this stuff? Now that our cluster is there, let's see if we can access it from our CLI, because that was one of our goals, right? So I already have AWS configured with me, so this is the command which we need to get the kubeconfig file for the given cluster. Now our cluster name is Suraj in Cloud -1 that I need to update. So the command is AWS EKS update kubeconfig, the region which is EU West 2, which is London, and the Suraj in Cloud 1. It added a new config. We can explore kubectl config get context. You can see along with my Docker desktop the new config has been added, and current namespace, if it shows default, okay, that means I am on the cluster. I can access the cluster. If I do the nodes, there are no nodes. If I say pods in all the namespace, you see I can see only core DNS pod, they are into pending state. Let's switch to kube system namespace and see what things are there. All okay, core DNS deployment which is in pending, and kube proxy daemon set 0, AWS node which is the VPC CNI, that is also 0 because there is no node. Now let's try to add a node group in our cluster and see how that goes. So let's go to cluster and the configuration and then compute and let's add a node group. Now this will be a managed node group, right? Not the self-managed. Now let's give it a name. We'll say Suraj in Cloud -1 nodes. The node IAM role which we already saw, EKS node role, we're going to see that. Use launch template, now, but we don't have any launch template, so we'll just go with default. Do we want any label? So let's say this is my env test label. Let's see how that goes. You can add some taints to these nodes as well, some tags to this node group. Only one label, and there will be by default some other label as well, which we will see. Here you can select the EMI, so I'm just gonna stick to Amazon Linux 2. In next videos we'll explore what this portal rocket is. It's basically a container Linux from the Amazon. Capacity type on demand and spot you can select. I'm gonna go with on demand. And instance type, okay, let's keep it to t3.medium, the basic one, but you can select from this list as well. Disk space, let's stick to 20. Node group scaling, because this is managed node group, it will create the auto scaling group behind the scene. So these are the settings which will go inside that auto scaling group. Now minimum node I want 2, maximum I want 2, desired is 2 as well. Node group update configuration, I think this is for the what do you say, the auto scaling. What does it say? Set the maximum number or percentage of unavailable node to be tolerated during the node group version update. Oh, when we update the node group, this is kind of a toleration. Node group network configuration, I'm gonna use the same VPC, so it selected like few privates and subnets as well. So do we want to configure SSH access to them? So we can just say yes, and it will select few things more, but usually I prefer to use SSM, which is session manager, to access these groups, which we'll see in another episode, how we can configure and access this over the SSH. SSM is like more secure because it simply uses ARM role and gives you either CLI or browser access, whereas with your SSH there's additional hassle to manage your SSH keys. Next, now let's review the settings. And okay, for now what I will do is I will remove the label, just keep it default. Nice, and let's create it. So node group creation is in progress. This may take few minutes. Now if we come back into the cluster, now in overview, oh, the nodes are still provisioning, so you won't see, but in here under the compute you will see now there is one node group. You can define multiple node groups. Now these node groups can be managed by EKS, or they can be self-managed as well, and you can define some Fargate profile as well, based on which it will spin your pod onto these Fargate nodes, which we'll see later. Now let's go into the node group and what other things we can see here. You can see the on for the node group. As I said, because it is managed node group, behind the scene it creates the auto scaling group for us as well. That will appear here. The capacity was on demand and not spot, and these things for the auto scaling group. We didn't configure any sort of SSH subnets. The list of nodes will come up here. If there are any health issues, Kubernetes labels, and if there are any taints. Now even if they are managed node group, under the hood they are EC2 machines. So if we go to the EC2 console, which is here, you will see the two instances are now initializing, right? And also, as I said, it's spin up the auto scaling group. You will see there is one auto scaling group now which they spin up, right? And if we see more information about that auto scaling group, is 222 in the capacity which we already provisioned, right? So now I think once this instances passes the status check, we'll be able to see those instances here. Now when these instances will spin up, because this is managed node group, picking up the AMI, kubelet and all other stuff is the EKS responsibility, so it will keep all these things together. So yeah, it takes quite a lot of time. When I was testing previously, it took around 10-15 minutes to spin up all those things. So let's come back to that. So one of the instances has passed the status check, so we should be able to see that here. Not yet. Okay, cool. Node group status is active. We can see both the nodes are in ready state as well. Here they also passed a check. Cool. So technically we don't need to worry about those EC2 instances, but just to see what's going on under the hood, I was checking that out. Cool. So as you can see, the nodes are populated, and if we go in the overview, you will see the nodes are there, and I think those pods which we saw, they should be now on some nodes. Okay, they were failed scheduling. Interesting. So now let's go back to our CLI and let's see if there are nodes. Nice. We can see two nodes and they are in ready state as well, and these pods are in running state as well. And if we see those pods, they are scheduled on this nodes 467 and 5122. Interesting. And the VPC CNI also working properly. Let's see the logs of one of them. Nice. So this VPC CNI basically does the IP address allocation and all other required CNI stuff for us. Nice. So this way we saw what IAM roles are required, what are the VPC considerations that we need to see. Then we saw various options to configure in the EKS console. We also created a node group and attach it to the cluster, and saw how the node, once the nodes are up, the pods came up and the whole EKS thing. So in upcoming videos we'll see more deep dive on each one of these components, how they are being configured, how it works under the hood and all that stuff. So hope you like this video and hope you learned something about the EKS, how you can spin it up and stuff. So that's it for today. Thank you. See you. Bye.